Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is here with me, and it's a treat to welcome Steve Herman, the Southeast Asia Bureau Chief of the Voice of America, to my studio, traveling in America. Steve, thank you for joining us. Steve is going to join us in this first exchange because we're going to address Chinese foreign policy. And Steve, you've been running into Chinese foreign policy reporting in Asia everywhere, in Japan,
all over Asia,
in the Philippines, and Korea. Chinese foreign policy in the neighborhood is peaceful rise, right, Gordon? I'm taught to say that correctly.
Absolutely. You really got the lingo down there, John.
Peaceful rise. I can't say it in Chinese, but I can say it in English. And peaceful rise, and you grin. Arthur Waldron of the University of Pennsylvania joins us. Arthur, a very good evening to you. The peaceful rise of the People's Republic of China. Steve's been reporting on this, and he'll contribute that the peaceful rise has run into some bumps. Do I say that correctly, Gordon? Bumps.
Yes.
In Japan, in the Philippines, in Korea, in South Korea, and in Vietnam. So I turn this over to you, Gordon, where you want to start the peaceful rise bumps.
Okay. Arthur, we have seen a number of articles from Chinese and from Americans about how China really wants to meld itself into the international community, doesn't want conflict. You have pointed out one of these by Yan Shutong of Tsinghua University. There's all sorts of people, though, who are really dying to say that China is going to be just like us. What do you think?
Well, I think that if you look at what China is doing, that they are certainly turning up the flame on the gas stove. As I always say, they never put it out. There's always a pilot light. You never get resolution. But what they've done over the last year would have caused gasps among K Street China watchers even 3 years before. If you told them that they were going to be attempting to intercept, that they were going to be warning foreign military aircraft, that they were going to be claiming the South China Sea and so forth and so on, they're being very aggressive. But I think they expect to get away with it. And I'd just add to the list you gave of countries in Southeast Asia, Steve, Burma, it seems to me, is a huge setback for China, but we may not have time to talk about that.
No, it was in the State of the Union last night. Very well done, Arthur. That's a nice segue. I was just reading from the President's Address 2014, and Steve, comment on this. From Tunisia to Burma, we're, United States, supporting those who are willing to do hard work of building democracy. Do you find that Burma is a uniform success? Because we've had some of those bumps have been reported to us in Burma.
I think we have bumps ahead in Burma, but if you look back on the last few years, how quickly the relationship normalized between the United States and Burma, and why was that? That was obviously, in the eyes of most observers, because the Burmese did not want to be totally beholden to the Chinese. And when we talk about countries like Burma and China, I was in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam last year, and people were very warm to me as an American. We have to remember the problems that the Vietnamese had with the United States lasted less than 20 years. Their problems with China have been going on for 1,000 years.
And the interesting thing we talk about Burma, where essentially Chinese foreign policy has really been set back, but also Nepal, where the Maoists were thrown out of office in December. So essentially, around Asia, and not just Burma, we are seeing Chinese foreign policy in retreat. That essentially these bad policies from Beijing are now starting to have an effect, and people in Southeast Asia and the other parts of China's periphery are now pushing back.
Arthur, to you again from the State of the Union less than 24 hours ago. And we will continue, said the President, to focus on the Asia Pacific, where we support our allies, shape a future of greater security and prosperity, and extend a hand to those devastated by disaster, as we did in the Philippines. Where that bit there, Arthur, where we support our allies, is that about Japan?
I hope that Mr. Obama knows exactly what that means, in particular with respect to Japan, because the Chinese are really trying to hang the blame on Japan for a situation which they have created by encouraging and promoting official anti-Japanese feeling. And I fear that some Americans are going to say, we have to be peacemakers here. We can't really stand up with the Japanese. We have to try to have a process of dialogue. What that means, when you boil it down, is that we pressure the Japanese to make concessions because we have no way of pressuring the Chinese. But what Mr. Obama says is absolutely sound, which is that the democratic countries in East Asia are all now being threatened, and I would say threatened militarily by China, which has this huge, bright, shiny new military, and they are not doing what China hoped, which was to sort of bow down and say, oh my God, we have no choice but to defer to you. They are instead starting to talk about, and they are developing their own forces to oppose. Even the little Philippines are a big headache for China.
Steve, you've been traveling in the region,
Yes.
and you have new anxieties about the conflict. How so?
Well, there are analysts out there older and wiser than me who are expressing great anxiety, saying we've never seen tensions this high in the post-World War II era, and the chances of an increase in a conflict between China and Japan have gone up considerably.
Well, you look at Asia right now, and 5 years ago, people were talking about peace. They were talking about economic development, how Asia was going to rule the world. And today, what's the conversation about Asia? It's 1914. Now,
Yeah.
part of it, of course, is because this is the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I, but also because it really does look like 1914. Also looks like 1937 when you had essentially World War II start in Asia. And this is really dangerous
Arthur,
right now.
go ahead. Arthur
I
wanted to
was just
step on the
gonna say
1914.
that I share very, very serious concern about this, because all you need is for one Japanese and one Chinese plane to get in a dogfight. And it doesn't matter who gets killed or what happens. There are all kinds of ramifications. There's escalation. The Japanese are quite capable of, they're being very responsible now, but they're quite capable of building themselves up, if they don't trust anyone else, to be a formidable military power. And the Chinese government bases its ideas on everything working. And even this thing with the Jade Rabbit is a great source of loss of face for them. Well, if they had a bunch of Chinese airplanes shot down by the Koreans, that would send seismic tremors through the Chinese government. So I think that the risk of escalation here is very high. And as a former professor of strategy, I can tell you that escalation is that's what makes little incidents into wars, and it's very, very hard to stop.
Steve, I'll turn the screw on this, because the question here is, in the Middle East, the United States is presenting this face. It's a tough neighborhood. We're out of there. They'll settle their own problems. Do the people in Asia you've been visiting, all these countries, do they believe the U.S. is going to back out and let the Asia settle this problem? In other words, you got to deal with China on your own.
There is concern about that, especially in Japan, where they microscopically examine the subtleties of every comment made by any official in or from Washington, and they're detecting a bit of a weakness, which I don't think is necessarily valid. We have tens of thousands of troops in Japan and South Korea. We have solid treaties that commit us to come to the aid of those two countries should there be an attack on them.
That's right, but when Ambassador Kennedy condemned the Asakuni Shrine, which is her right to do, she should have immediately paired that with the condemnation of massive government anti-Japanese propaganda in China.
Well, the Japanese haven't been doing themselves any favors lately by engaging in these ritualistic, symbolic acts that cause extreme anger in both Beijing and Seoul, among other countries.
Well, that is true, but it still has to be seen in the context. If you've ever been to the Museum of Korean Heritage outside of Seoul,
I have,
and you've seen the dioramas of sick Korean doctors vivisecting sick Japanese doctors vivisecting Korean women, all of these countries sort of keep the embers of war and anger alive. And it would be good if they would all stop. But I think that we have to criticize them either as a group or not at all. I think that to single one out is probably a mistake. However, it's the Chinese who have taken the military measures.
Arthur Waldron at the University of Pennsylvania, Steve Herman, Southeast Asia Bureau for the Voice of America, Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. There is nothing inevitable about a conflict, but I've learned again and again, as Arthur warns us, when you watch these escalations, they only go in one direction. You either stop it now or it's inevitable later. I'm John Batchelor.